The forest was alive with shadows, though the sun had not yet vanished completely behind the horizon. A thin fog clung to the ground, curling around the roots of gnarled oaks and twisted pines, obscuring the path ahead. The air was heavy, humid, and tinged with the scent of decaying leaves, moss, and something else, something faint metallic like blood. 5 men moved through it, their boots squelching in the mud, eyes darting nervously. They whispered to each other in low tones, as if speaking too loudly might awaken the forest itself. Each carried a weapon, rusty knives, an old musket, and a hunting rifle that had seen better days. The weight of their task pressed down on them, though none spoke its name. She was already there, though they did not know it. Her presence was not announced by sound, or shadow, or even movement. It was a silence that crawled under their skin, a pressure in the air that made their stomachs churn. The legends whispered about her had traveled far beyond the plantation. A slave girl who had disappeared into these woods, a girl who was said to move like smoke and vanish like wind. None who had sought her had ever returned, and still the men persisted, driven by greed, curiosity, and a twisted sense of pride. The first one, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, stopped abruptly. His nostrils flared as he sniffed the air, and he motioned for the others to halt. "Do you smell that?" he asked, his voice rough, tight with unease. "What?" Another said, a man with thin, bony fingers gripping the hilt of his knife. He squinted through the fog, trying to see what the first had sensed. "It's just the forest." "No," the tall man insisted. "It's something else." His eyes shifted nervously, scanning the shadows between the trees. The fog swirled as if stirred by an unseen hand, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw a dark shape vanish into the underbrush. They pressed on, each step slower than the last. The forest seemed to pulse around them, branches creaking, leaves rustling in a way that mimicked whispers. Every so often, they thought they heard footsteps behind them, but when they turned, there was nothing. A twig snapping here, a branch falling there, yet the feeling of being watched intensified with every heartbeat. Far deeper into the woods, she moved like a phantom. Her skin glistened dark and wet beneath the fading sunlight, her eyes sharp and aware, always calculating. She had learned the ways of this forest long before the men had set foot here. Every tree, every root, every hollow and stream was a part of her arsenal. She didn't need weapons. The woods themselves obeyed her. Birds would fall silent when she passed, and the wind seemed to carry her warnings, rustling through the branches to disorient those who dared to hunt her. The first trap was simple. A loop of thin cord, camouflaged with leaves and twigs, lay across the path. The man with the scar fell into it first, catching himself just as the rope tightened around his ankle. He yelped, cursing, and fell forward onto the mud. "What the hell?" his companion started, but the sound of snapping twigs distracted him. A shadow flitted through the trees, moving faster than the eye could follow. The man looked around wildly, trying to spot her, but it was like trying to see a whisper. She didn't strike yet. Not this time. The fear in their eyes was weapon enough. The next trap was more elaborate. She had used fallen branches and mud to create a pit hidden beneath a thin layer of leaves. One of the men stepped on it, and the ground gave way beneath him. He screamed as he fell into the shallow hole, catching himself on his hands and knees. Mud caked his face and hands, and when he looked up, the others were frozen in terror, their breaths ragged, weapons shaking in their hands. This is impossible," one yelled. She's not human." The scarred man swore violently, trying to calm himself, but even he could feel the forest shifting against them. Something ancient and vengeful seemed to pulse through the undergrowth, and for the first time, they realized they were not merely hunters. They were the prey. Her mind, sharp as the edge of a knife, mapped their movements, anticipating their panic. She had seen this arrogance before. Men thought they could chase, corner, and capture. They underestimated the power of survival, the instinct forged through pain and oppression. She had learned, through years of cruelty and torment, That fear was a weapon more deadly than any blade. The men tried to regroup. They whispered urgently, planning, plotting, but every idea was dismantled by the forest. Roots seemed to twist beneath their feet, leading them in circles. Shadows played tricks on their eyes. And always just at the edge of vision, she was there, watching, waiting. The night began to fall, and with it came a chilling cold that sank into their bones. Mist rose from the forest floor, thickening and curling around the trunks like spectral fingers. Each man's heart pounded so loud, they feared it would betray them. And in that mist, she moved closer, silent, inexorable, her breath steady, unafraid. By the time darkness fully claimed the forest, the men had lost their sense of direction. Panic had replaced strategy. Their voices, once harsh and commanding, were now shaky, desperate whispers. Somewhere in the distance, a branch cracked sharply, too deliberate to be natural. They froze, holding their weapons in trembling hands. Then, the first scream pierced the night. High-pitched, raw, human. It was cut short, swallowed by the forest. The remaining four spun, trying to locate the source, but only the fog answered. And from that silence, another sound emerged, a low, haunting laughter. Not a human laugh, but something that carried the weight of rage, of centuries of pain, and the promise of death. "What the hell? Who's there?" the scarred man shouted, trying to sound commanding, but the quiver in his voice betrayed him. No one answered. Only the forest and the laughter and the faintest glint of eyes in the darkness that didn't blink, that didn't move, that simply watched. Her traps were only the beginning. The hunt was not about capture. It was about revelation. She would show them what it meant to underestimate what they feared. And when it was done, the forest would swallow their screams, and no one would know why the woods had claimed 5 men that night. And in the distance, where moonlight barely touched, she waited, every muscle coiled, every thought precise. Tonight, the hunters would learn that she was not prey. She was the reckoning. The fog thickened, turning the forest into a labyrinth of gray and black. The men stumbled blindly over roots and rocks, their lungs burning, eyes straining to see beyond the veil. Every shadow seemed to twist into a figure, every rustle of leaves a whisper of death. The first man was gone, vanished without a trace after his scream, leaving only a pool of blood half-masked by mud. The remaining 4 were frantic, voices rising in panic. "We can't stay together," one said, his words tremulous. She'll pick us off if we're in a group." The scarred man shook his head violently. "No, splitting up is suicide. We need to find her," and his sentence was cut short by the sudden snap of a branch. He turned, gun raised, but the fog swallowed the sound. Something moved so fast he thought he'd imagined it. A shadow flickered between the trees, darker than night itself, impossibly swift. The second trap was crueler than the first. A tangle of thorny vines, sharpened to knife-like points, had been hidden in a shallow trench. One of the men fell into it, a cry tearing from his throat as the thorns ripped at his arms and face. Blood mingled with mud, dripping in thick, dark rivulets onto the forest floor. He tried to claw his way out, but the vines were relentless, binding him tighter with every frantic movement. She's everywhere," he screamed, his words slurred with panic and pain. It's not human." The scarred man fired his rifle blindly into the fog, the blast echoing like a cannon through the trees. But it did nothing. No sound of fleeing, no scream, no echo of struggle. The forest swallowed everything. She watched silently, perched in the shadow of a massive oak, her eyes glinting like onyx. She didn't need weapons. The forest was her arsenal, and the fear in their hearts was her blade. Every heartbeat they gave away was a map, every tremble in their voice a clue. She moved with the precision of a predator, unseen yet omnipresent, like the darkness itself had taken form. One by one, the men tried to navigate through the trees, each step uncertain. The ground shifted underfoot, as if alive. Roots reached like hands, tripping them, snagging boots, pulling them down. Branches whipped their faces. The fog coiled around them like serpents, disorienting, hiding the forest's true shape. Another scream pierced the night, ragged and brief. The man with the bony fingers, the one who had insisted it was just the forest, ran blindly, tripping over a root and tumbling down a slope. His legs snapped under the fall, a sickening crunch that silenced him. He tried to call for help, but only a gurgling moan escaped, swallowed immediately by the mist. The scarred man and his remaining companion, tall, broad-shouldered, with a nervous twitch in his jaw, realized that logic and strength would not save them. Every plan they tried fell apart. Every path led to more terror. The forest was no longer just trees and mud. It was a living, breathing entity responding to her presence, amplifying her power. And then the laughter came again. Not playful, not human. It was a low, vibrating sound, resonating through the trunks and leaves, seeping into their bones. It was joy, yes, but joy twisted by vengeance and malice. The tall man's hands shook as he gripped his knife. We have to fight," he stammered. The scarred man shook his head. "Fight what? There's nothing here. She's not human. She's the forest itself." They stumbled into a clearing, and for the first time, the moonlight fell upon them. But what they saw made their blood freeze. The ground was littered with remnants of the forest's victims, bones, tattered clothing, shredded mud-stained rags. And in the center, a small, dark figure moved with a predator's grace, stepping between the debris like a dancer. Her hair flowed like liquid night, her eyes gleaming. There was no fear in her gaze, only purpose and a terrible, silent promise. One of the men lunged, raising his rifle, but she vanished before the trigger was pulled. The bullet struck a tree behind her, splintering it, sending shards into the air. She reappeared behind him in a heartbeat, a shadow with teeth bared, and in a flurry of motion, his screams were silenced as the forest claimed him. The scarred man and the tall companion ran, stumbling through roots and mud, desperate to escape. But she was everywhere, slipping through the fog, twisting through shadows, turning the forest itself into a trap. Branches whipped their faces, roots wrapped around ankles, and the ground seemed to shift beneath their weight, guiding them into ambush after ambush. Fear had replaced thought. Every breath was shallow, every heartbeat a drum of terror. They could hear the other two, screams, cries, silence. They knew, in some deep, instinctive part of themselves, that they were the last. And yet, still, they ran, driven by the same primal instinct that had always defined them, survival. But she did not hunt them as they imagined. She did not chase in straight lines or predictable patterns. She manipulated the forest, guiding them into traps, isolating them, watching as desperation eroded their minds. And always, always, she was at the edge of their vision, just a flicker, just a whisper, just enough to make their skin crawl with anticipation. By midnight, the forest had changed completely. The fog had thickened into a wall, almost tangible, and the moonlight was filtered into cold, gray shards through the twisted canopy. The scarred man's companion had fallen into another pit, a deep hollow lined with sharp rocks and rotting roots. His cries were ragged, desperate, and the forest swallowed them like water in a drain. The scarred man stumbled forward, alone, terror guiding every step. He could hear her laughter now, surrounding him, echoing from all directions. "Come on, come out. I'm not afraid of you," he shouted into the fog, voice shaking despite his effort. A branch snapped behind him. He spun, rifle raised, and for a brief second he saw her. Eyes like black fire, movements too fluid, too fast, too precise. And then she was gone. The forest was silent once more, save for the distant drip of water from leaves and the man's ragged breathing. He fell to his knees, realizing, with a cold, crushing certainty, that the forest had already chosen its end. He had no allies, no chance of escape. The stories he had laughed at, the warnings he had ignored, were all true. She was not just a girl, not just a fugitive. She was vengeance incarnate. And the night had only begun. By the time the first gray hints of dawn threatened the horizon, the scarred man was alone. His breath came in ragged gasps, every muscle quivering from exhaustion, every nerve screaming with the terror of the night. The forest no longer seemed like a place of trees and mud. It had become a predator itself. The fog was thicker than ever, curling around him like icy fingers, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed in the hollows of the woods like the ticking of some monstrous clock. He stumbled through the underbrush, limbs aching, mind teetering on the edge of madness. The blood from the others was still on his hands, sticky, dark, a constant reminder of how quickly life could be extinguished. Shadows seemed to shift just beyond the edge of his vision. A twisted tree branch appeared to reach out, and every time he blinked, he swore he saw her there, watching, waiting. You can't. She can't be real, he muttered, whispering to himself to keep from screaming aloud. His voice shook, and the sound seemed to amplify through the forest, bouncing back at him from every shadow. And then he heard it, a faint, deliberate clap. Slow, echoing, measured. He froze. The sound came again, closer, then another, coming from a dozen directions at once. His pulse jumped. His hands clenched into fists, but there was nothing but the fog and the oppressive trees. "Show yourself," he shouted, though the words felt feeble, hollow. "I'm not afraid of you." The laughter came in reply. Low, resonant, echoing. Not human, yet somehow familiar. A sound of ancient grief and rage wrapped in cruelty. And then he saw her, or rather, glimpsed her, a shadow slipping between the trunks, darker than the fog, moving impossibly fast. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, piercing, unblinking. He raised his rifle, hands trembling so violently that the weapon wavered. I'm not afraid," he stammered again, but the words sounded pitiful, childish. And as he fired, the bullet struck nothing. The forest absorbed it, swallowing the sound and the impact. She was already behind him. He spun around, too late. A hand, cold and unyielding, pressed against his chest, and he fell backward into the mud. Her presence was overwhelming, a crushing weight of inevitability. Her eyes bore into his soul, unblinking, judging, accusing. "Why are you here?" she whispered, voice soft but edged with an unforgiving rage. "Why do you come to take what is not yours?" He tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. Words failed him. All he could do was stare, wide-eyed, as she moved around him with impossible speed, appearing and disappearing like a living shadow. The forest seemed to respond to her presence. Trees groaned, roots twisted, the fog thickened until he could barely see his own hands in front of his face. Shapes formed in the mist, figures of those who had come before him, their faces frozen in silent screams, their hands reaching, begging. He realized with horror that the forest had become a graveyard, and she was the keeper of it. "You hunted me," she said, almost softly, though the words carried the weight of thunder. "You thought I was weak. You thought I could be taken. You thought I was alone." The scar man tried to scramble away, but the ground shifted beneath him. Roots twisted like serpents, tangling around his legs and arms, pulling him down. He struggled, panicked, feeling the mud and roots grip him tighter with each thrashing movement. "You underestimated the power of survival," she continued, circling him. "You forgot what desperation can do. You forgot what pain can teach." She crouched low, her movements fluid, graceful, terrifyingly deliberate. Her eyes held no mercy, only the cold calculation of someone who had suffered too much to ever allow injustice again. Her fingers traced the air near his face, not touching him, but the force of her presence made him feel as though the very air were crushing him. "I'm not what you think," she whispered. "I'm not prey. I am the forest. I am the storm. I am the reckoning." And then she struck, not with claws or weapons, but with a terror so absolute that it invaded his mind. The shadows deepened, coiling around him, twisting his thoughts. He saw the faces of the others, twisted in pain, screaming silently. He saw the forest bending, closing in, swallowing him. He screamed, a raw, desperate sound that carried through the trees, but it was meaningless. Time fractured, he could not tell how long he struggled. Minutes? Hours? Days? The forest seemed to stretch infinitely, fog curling into endless darkness, the air thick and suffocating. She moved through the mist like a shadow, always just beyond reach, yet always present. Every breath he took was filled with the scent of mud, blood, and her quiet, inevitable judgment. And then silence fell. Absolute. The fog cleared just enough for him to see the first pale light of dawn seeping through the canopy. The forest was quiet still. He was alone, no sign of the others. No blood, no bones, only the lingering echo of screams in his mind. He tried to move, tried to stand, but his body would not obey. His limbs were heavy, numb, and his mind raced with hallucinations. Was she gone? Could he have survived? The forest whispered around him, and in the whisper, he thought he heard her voice one last time. Remember me. Remember this forest. Remember what happens when the hunted becomes the hunter. He fell back into the mud, eyes wide, chest heaving. And then, slowly, impossibly, he realized something. The forest had not released him. He had been spared, not out of mercy, but because the hunt was not yet over. Her presence lingered, coiled in every shadow, in every tree, in every breath of wind. And in that moment, he understood. Escape was an illusion. Survival was temporary, and the reckoning that would come for him, as it had for the others. The sun rose, weak and pale, filtering through the branches like tentative fingers. The forest, calm again, seemed to mock him, each rustle of leaves a reminder of the night's horrors. And in the depths of the trees, she watched, silent, patient, eternal, a shadow of vengeance, a force of nature, a girl who had become legend. He would carry the memory of her forever, even if he lived. Every whisper of wind, every snap of twig, every shadow that moved at the edge of sight would remind him that the hunter was never human and the hunted would never return. The scarred man staggered through the forest, each step heavier than the last. His limbs ached, his chest burned with exhaustion, and his mind throbbed from the relentless terror of the night. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves whispered threats he could not ignore. The fog wrapped around him like a suffocating shroud, curling into his clothes, biting his skin, and filling his ears with distant, echoing screams that were no longer real, but felt impossibly true. The forest had changed since night fell. Trees bent unnaturally, their branches twisting like claws, their bark mottled and dark with something that gleamed like blood in the dim light. Roots protruded from the ground in grotesque arcs, as if the earth itself had risen to hunt him. The air was thick with the scent of decay, damp mud, and something metallic he could not name. He stumbled over a root, almost face-planting in the mud, and saw something that froze him in place. A reflection, not of himself, but of the others. Their eyes stared blankly from the puddles, twisted in silent screams, mouths open in eternal terror. He gagged, trying to tear his eyes away, but they followed him wherever he looked. A sound came from behind him, a soft, deliberate clapping. He whirled around, heart hammering, and glimpsed her again. She moved like smoke, darker than the shadows, eyes glowing with a terrible light. She wasn't human. No human could move like that, could bend a forest to her will, could evoke fear so absolute. She circled him silently, each step a measured dance, her presence warping the very air. "You've survived this far," she said, her voice low, almost melodic, but every word vibrated through him like thunder. "Why? I don't know," he stammered, shivering. I just wanted to live." Her lips curved slightly, not in kindness, but in the way a storm curves before it breaks. "Survival isn't enough. Not here. Not with me. You were not meant to leave these woods." The fog thickened, blinding him, and the forest seemed to twist around him. Paths that had been clear seconds ago were gone, replaced by impossible walls of trees and vines. Every direction he tried led him back to the same clearing, the same central spot where she hovered like a wraith. Panic clawed at his mind. He realized he was no longer moving forward. He was moving in circles, trapped, the forest bending reality to her will. The last vestiges of reason began to crumble. He clawed at the ground, trying to dig, trying to escape, but the roots resisted, wrapping around his wrists and ankles like living snakes. Every attempt to break free only tightened their grip. His breathing became shallow, rapid. Sweat and mud coated his face, his hands, his chest. The screams in his mind were deafening now, the shadows around him twisting into grotesque, mocking shapes. And then he saw them, eyes in the trees. Hundreds of them, glowing faintly in the dim light, blinking in unison. They were hers, he realized. Every tree, every shadow, every root pulsed with her awareness. The forest was not just her hunting ground. It was her body, her weapon, her form made infinite. He could feel her thoughts, her intentions, her rage, pressing into his mind like waves of ice. "Do you see now?" she whispered, stepping closer, the shadows parting for her. "Do you understand what it means to hunt without mercy? To take without consequence? You will not leave. You cannot leave. Not one of you ever has." Desperation clawed at him. "Please, please," he begged. "I'll do anything. I'll leave. I'll never return. She tilted her head, considering him. Then almost imperceptibly she smiled. "It is too late for bargains. The forest does not forgive. The hunted cannot plead. The hunter will become the prey. And tonight, you will learn why no one returns." He tried to run, but the forest had already decided his path. The fog thickened into a wall, roots twisted into bridges and snares, and the trees seemed to shift positions, corralling him toward the center of the clearing. Every scream of his fellow hunters echoed in the mist, feeding her, strengthening her. Then came a first strike. A root shot out like a whip, coiling around his leg, pulling him down with brutal force. He fell hard, scraping his face across mud and rock. Before he could rise, another root lashed his arms, pinning him in place. She stepped closer, a shadow among shadows, her eyes burning with inevitability. He realized something terrible. The forest was not just a weapon, it was alive. It thought, it acted, it judged. And she was its heart, its will, its conscience. Every tree, every root, every patch of fog was an extension of her. There was no escape. There was only the reckoning. You're not human," he gasped, terror breaking through his exhaustion. She knelt before him, her face inches from his. "I am more human than you, and yet far beyond it. You took everything from me, my freedom, my family, my life. And I survived. I adapted. I became more than what you could imagine. And now, you will understand what it means to face me." The ground beneath him shifted violently. Roots erupted, pulling him down into a pit lined with jagged stones. He struggled, but it was useless. She raised her hand, and the fog thickened, suffocating, curling into his lungs, filling his mind with visions. The screams of those who had hunted her before, the endless forest twisting around them, the inevitability of their demise. Hours, or perhaps minutes, he could not tell, passed. Time had lost all meaning. He was trapped in a cycle of fear, pain, and hallucinations, every second an eternity. And all the while, she watched, silent, patient, omnipotent. Finally, she spoke. "Do you understand now?" He could only shake his head, tears streaking the mud on his face. His body was broken, his mind frayed. I understand. I surrender." Her eyes softened, not with mercy, but with the weight of inevitability. There is no surrender here. There is only the forest, and the forest claims what is owed. And you, owe for your arrogance, your cruelty, your blindness. The roots coiled tighter, lifting him slightly off the ground. He felt the pressure in his chest, his throat, his head, as if the forest itself were crushing him. And in that moment, he understood the truth. She had become more than vengeance. She had become justice incarnate, unstoppable, eternal, a force that no one could defeat. The fog parted just enough for him to see her fully, a girl transformed into a shadow, the darkness of the woods given form, eyes alight with fire and purpose. She was beautiful in a terrible, alien way, and he realized the horror of what he had done, the lives he had taken, the arrogance that had brought him here. And then, as the roots tightened, as the air seemed to bend around her, he felt something that was worse than pain. The certainty that this night would never end, that the forest would always remember, that she would always wait for the next hunter to wander into her realm. The forest had won. The scarred man hung suspended, roots coiled like serpents around his arms and legs, the fog pressing against him from all sides. His chest heaved, lungs burning, eyes wide with terror, mind fraying at the edges. Yet, amidst the suffocating fear, he noticed something new. The forest had become still, almost silent, as if it were holding its breath. And she stepped fully into the clearing, no longer shadow, no longer fleeting. She was the forest's heart, its wrath, and its truth made flesh. "You will see now," she whispered, voice carrying across the stillness, vibrating in his chest, in his bones, in his mind. "You will see what it means to take without consequence. You will see what happens when the hunter becomes the prey." The fog swirled, thickening until it was nearly solid. Shapes emerged from it, shapes he recognized with a horror that made his stomach knot. The bodies of the others, twisted, mangled, lifeless, but moving. Their eyes opened, blank and soulless, faces frozen in expressions of terror and rage. They were hers now, extensions of her power, a terrifying army of the consumed. He screamed, thrashing into roots. "No, no, I didn't mean." She raised a hand, and the fog obeyed like water. The spectral forms of the others reached for him, pulling, dragging, clawing. He felt their cold hands on his skin, their invisible fingers penetrating his mind, showing him flashes of everything he had done, the lives he had taken, the cruelty he had inflicted, the arrogance that had led him here. Each memory burned like acid, each face a dagger in his mind. "You see," she said softly, almost kindly, "you see why you are nothing here. You see why no one returns." He tried to plead, to beg, to offer anything to stop it, but words meant nothing. The forest itself had absorbed them, twisting them into whispers of torment. Every step he took was futile, every breath a battle against the suffocating weight of inevitability. And then, the final truth revealed itself. The forest began to move, not just the fog, the roots, the shadows, but the very ground beneath him. Trees shifted imperceptibly, shaping a massive spiral, funneling him toward the center. And there she stood, at the heart of it all, eyes blazing, dark hair flowing, a predator made eternal. "You thought you could hunt me," she said, voice now reverberating like thunder. "You thought you could dominate what you did not understand. But I'm not prey. I'm not weak. I am the reckoning." The roots tightened one final time, lifting him from the mud. He could barely breathe, could barely see, could barely think. Panic, fear, despair, all merged into one incomprehensible terror. He realized then that the hunt had never been about capture. It had been about understanding, about learning, about witnessing the true cost of cruelty. And in that moment, he saw it, not just the forest, not just her, but himself. The man he had been, arrogant, cruel, fearless of consequences. And now, nothing remained. The forest had stripped him bare, reduced him to instinct, to the rawest, most fragile form of survival, awareness that he had lost, utterly, irreversibly. Her hand hovered above him, the fog wrapping tighter, the air heavy with inevitability. He braced for the strike, for death, for whatever form of terror she would unleash. And then nothing. Silence. He opened his eyes, dazed. The fog was thinning. The sun had risen fully now, pale light filtering through the trees. The forest seemed normal, almost peaceful. No screams, no shadows, no movement beyond the birds and the wind. He struggled to his knees, heart pounding, mind reeling. He had survived? Could it be over? Then he noticed it, the leaves at his feet, arranged in a circle. A symbol, not random, deliberate, a mark of her presence. And in the center, a single black